On the morning of September 16, 1960, Northwest Orient Airlines' final Boeing 377 Stratocruiser touched down in Seattle, and the aviation press barely noted the occasion. But 30 years later, the captain who had ditched one in the Pacific, the mechanics who had rebuilt its 28-cylinder engines, and the BOAC stewards who served breakfast in bed over the Atlantic all agreed on a verdict that made no sense on paper. The most dangerous airliner of the 1950s was also the most magnificent machine ever built. The night was October 16, 1956. N90943, Clipper Sovereign of the Skies, droned at 12,000 feet over the Pacific, 2,000 miles from San Francisco. The cockpit smelled of hot oil and electrical insulation. Captain Richard Ogg felt the runaway propeller's vibration through the control column, a rhythmic hammering that felt less like an emergency and more like the machine was trying to tell him something. In 1949, the smart money said Boeing had no business building airliners. Douglas owned the market with the DC-4 and DC-6. Lockheed had the Constellation, with its triple tail and Art Deco silhouette that made it the most beautiful airplane in the sky. Boeing was a bomber company, and the Stratocruiser was an 83,500-pound dinosaur in an age of sleek Predators. It cost $2 million per copy. It burned 2,000 pounds of fuel per hour. It required a flight engineer, a navigator, and a co-pilot just to keep its 4 Pratt and Whitney R4360 Wasp major engines synchronized. Those engines had 28 cylinders arranged in 4 spiral rows. They were the most powerful radial engines ever built, and they were maintenance nightmares. The industry assumed the 377 would fail. That assumption was almost correct. But Boeing did not start with a blank sheet. They started with the C-97 Stratofreighter, which itself came from the B-29 Superfortress. The double-bubble fuselage was not a stylistic choice. It was a structural solution that gave the airplane an 11-foot internal diameter, enough for a lower deck lounge and 6,600 cubic feet of interior space. The wing was not new. It was the Boeing 117 airfoil developed for the B-29, refined to be 16% stronger, 650 pounds lighter, and 26% more efficient than the original. The pressurization system came from wartime experience at high altitude. Every luxury feature had an engineering parent. The spiral staircase was not decoration. It was the most efficient way to connect 2 pressurized compartments within a double-bubble fuselage. The sleeping berths were not an amenity. They were a payload solution for an airplane designed to fly 4,200 miles nonstop. The lower deck cocktail lounge was not marketing. It was the only use that made sense of a cargo hold converted to passenger space. That is not coincidence. That is engineering. Pan American proved the concept first. In April 1949, the same Clipper Sovereign of the Skies, yes, that exact airframe, registration N90943, opened scheduled service from San Francisco to Honolulu. By December, Pan Am, BOAC, and American Overseas Airlines were flying the Atlantic. Northwest Orient deployed it from Seattle to Miami, from Hawaii to New York, and eventually to Tokyo. BOAC called its London-New York service the Monarch and offered something no competitor could match: breakfast in bed at 18,000 feet. United Airlines bought the type, decided it was too expensive, and sold their frames to BOAC, who needed the capacity while its Comet 1 jetliners were grounded after their own structural failures. The 11-foot fuselage diameter made it the largest passenger aircraft of its era. The 56 airliners Boeing built were merely the visible fraction of 888 total C-97 and KC-97 airframes that served the military into the 1970s. The design was so fundamentally right that when the airliners were spent, their fuselages became the super guppies that carried Saturn V rocket stages for Apollo. No single airliner serves as a transoceanic luxury flagship, a military aerial tanker, a volumetric transport for NASA, and the ancestor of the entire outsized cargo category unless it possesses one core quality: a fuselage so volumetrically efficient that the shape itself becomes the payload. The double bubble cross-section designed to carry military cargo became 2 decades later the only shape that could swallow a Saturn 5-stage hole. That is not adaptation. That is foresight. The crew of Pan Am Flight 6 spent 8 hours orbiting the Coast Guard cutter Pontchartrain in the dark. They had to wait for dawn because ditching a 110-foot-long, 148,000-pound airplane at night was suicide. The passengers later described not panic, but a strange, suspended calm. The Stratocruiser was so large, so stable, so acoustically insulated from its own 4-bladed propellers, that even with 2 engines failing and the fuselage shaking, it felt less like an airplane in distress and more like an ocean liner riding heavy weather. Captain Ogg later explained that the 377's control response remained precise even at the edge of its envelope. The machine was not fighting him, it was giving him time. That is not sentiment, that is mass and moment of inertia. An 83,500-pound airframe with a 141-foot wingspan does not twitch like a fighter. It trends, it informs, it allows a pilot to think. The Stratocruiser was killed by its propellers. Hamilton's Standard had hollowed the steel blades and filled them with neoprene to save weight. The glue failed. The filler shifted outward under centrifugal force. The blades cracked, separated, and tore engines from wings. Pan Am lost 7 Stratocruisers between 1952 and 1959, nearly 1 per year. In April 1952, Pan Am Flight 202 shook itself to death over the Amazon when a propeller blade separated. All 50 aboard died, and the number 2 engine was never found. In March 1955, another Pan Am Stratocruiser dropped its number 3 engine and propeller into the Pacific off Oregon and ditched. 4 of 23 aboard died. The Civil Aeronautics Board finally ordered the hollow core props removed in 1958, 12 years after the airplane first flew. By then, the jets had arrived. Transocean sold its 14 Stratocruisers for $7,500 each, less than the price of a new Aston Martin DB4. The military variants flew on into the 1970s. The Super Guppies flew into the 1990s. The airliners were gone by 1961. The Boeing 377 Stratocruiser proves that engineering excellence and commercial failure are not opposites. They are the same object viewed from different distances. The most forgiving airframe was paired with the most lethal propellers. The most spacious cabin was paired with the most voracious fuel consumption. The machine that passengers loved most was the one that accountants feared most, and that raises a question we still have not answered. If we had kept building airplanes that people loved to fly, rather than airplanes that were cheap to operate, would we have lost more, or would we have gained something we traded away without knowing its value? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you're first to know when the next one lands.